So my name is Marcus Satchell. I'm the winemaker and owner at 33 Wines here in Inverloch in sunny South Gippsland. We've been here, Inverloch, as our cellar door and winery for the past 8 years and had the label going for the past 13 years. Yeah, my history with the region goes back quite a long way now. We moved back here about 20 years ago when we had young twins and decided we'd move back home. So this is home for both my wife Lisa, very important part of the business. She mostly runs the cellar door aspect of it. I mostly work in production. Yeah, so 20 years ago we moved back here. I guess I moved out of the Yarra Valley. I'd been in the Yarra Valley working there for about 8 years. That was my formative years and I was very lucky to work with some fantastic producers there. I left working there with Dominique Porte. And while I was there, I was also making some wines under contract. So we made wines for Giant Steps and Medhurst, who are now two of the highly regarded wineries in the Yarra Valley, and I guess that's where my love for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay really came from. When we came back 20 years ago, the region was a pretty, I'd say, like in its very infancy in terms of where it was in the Australian wine landscape. And one producer stood out above the rest, and that was Bass Phillip. Bass Phillip being the winery that really started the whole thing back in the 70s, was a real pioneer, a trailblazer. There was another winery over in East Gippsland that sort of pioneered Chardonnay for the region, which was Nicholson River. But yeah, we've been actually buying their grapes for the last couple of years, so it's been very exciting. So watch this space for potentially a single vineyard Nicholson River Chardonnay from 33. But yeah, I guess over the last 20 years, when I first moved back, because there wasn't too many producers, I really had to sort of fabricate a job, and that job became a bit of everything. So I'd never worked in vineyards before, so when I was in the Yarra, I was only a winemaker and winemaking. So when I first came back, I needed to jump into the vineyard, learn how to prune, learn how to do stuff, learn how to run vineyards, which was really great because then it kind of gave me a real kind of fundamental kind of grounding in actually growing grapes. And I think that's really helped with my winemaking now, because we actually run a few vineyards now of our own that we lease in the region. But it's really helped us helped me back then to really sort of get my hands dirty and understand how vines worked and what were the important bits to focus on. So I spent about 5 years at Purple Hand, and then the lure of a job at Bass Phillip. I got offered a job there, and so I ended up working with him. I was working with him on and off for a couple of years with Phillip at Bass Phillip. That was great. I mean, that was an amazing kind of a whole different journey into wine, and obviously Bass Phillip being one of the most important Pinot producers in the country, it was really great to just get his angle at making Pinot that was quite often a little bit different. He took risks, and I think I've kind of learnt to take risks as a result of what I learnt with Phillip. My risks are probably a little bit more kind of like straight down the path now, but definitely risks that I think are really important in winemaking. It's always really important to walk a line of treading kind of like on the edge, and just the job is, as a winemaker, to just not fall off it, just to hang on to it until, push as far as you dare. I left Bass Phillip and I sort of was like, oh, what now? And that was when basically I rang up a good friend from the Yarra Valley whose name's Cameron McKenzie, who happens to have started a small little gin venture called 4 Pillars. I rang him up and said, hey mate, just left my job and thinking about maybe we should do something together. And he said, yeah, let's do it. Let's do a Pinot project. And that was basically when 33 was born. We brought in another crazy friend of his called Stuart Gregor, and the three of us made a bit of wine together. The plan was to always kind of make Pinot Noir and really focus on that, because we felt like it was the strength of the region. There was 3 of us, sure, but we were really wanting to make 3 single vineyards, so the Dirty 3, the Dirt 1, the Dirt 2 and the Dirt 3, of 3 different expressions of Pinot Noir that were from South Gippsland. It took us a few years to get those vineyards together to be able to actually then do that. I think 2016 was the first time we made. First wine was in 2012, and then 2016 was our when we finally got the 3 dirts. And around about the same time, 4 Pillars was really taking off. So my wife and I decided that we'd take over the business, and that was basically when this cellar door was born. So around about 8 years ago, we set up this little place. We've got the winery out the back and the cellar door here. We've been on that journey ever since. So, and I guess the Pinot story is now still the most important part of like Dirty 3. We still do, all the dirts. We do Dirt 1, we do Dirt 2, Dirt 3, and then we have an all the dirt Chardonnay now as well too. And we're making a few other wines around the place as well too when we see fit that they're, if we can get our hands on a lovely parcel of grapes like we, last year we got some Sangiovese grapes from Nicholson River, which was a pretty special kind of, again, I was saying earlier about Nicholson River being a really important part of the Gippsland journey in wine. We managed to get some Sangiovese and some Chardonnay from there, so we've made a little Sangiovese from there. So if parcels of fruit pop up and I feel as though they're really kind of like can tell a compelling story and that they're really kind of, obviously need to be very good grapes in the first place, then we'll have a crack at making it and hopefully bottle it up. So this is a little map of South Gippsland really. So you've got Phillip Island over here, penguins and the prom. It's a nice way of kind of looking at South Gippsland, and I can tell a bit of the story about, it's quite an interesting place. It's probably, I'd say, one of the coldest places on mainland Australia for growing grapes that doesn't have any altitude. So Macedon would definitely be a little bit colder, but they're at 800 metres, so we're talking, maximum sort of in South Gippsland is like about 150 metres above sea level. So we're talking, low altitude, but cold naturally just from, being so south. So not any great surprise that it's a really fantastic place to grow Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. Yeah, if you look at here, Phillip Island and over in this part of Western Port Bay really has a lot in common with Mornings Peninsula in terms of climate. There's some really, really fantastic, much like Mornington, there's some really fantastic Pinot, but the soils over here on Phillip Island are quite red and volcanic origin, and then you can get sort of more sandy, grey clay loam soils through once you get onto the actual mainland. Very, very different part of South Gippsland to when you get over more into the hills here of around Leongatha and Curramborough, which is essentially where Bass Phillip launched off in the 70s, and then following that there was a bit of vineyard explosion in the 90s. So a lot of these vineyards were all planted in the 90s around the Leongatha area. But a lot of the vineyards around this area are all red dirt, volcanic origin. So very, very deep soils, like 9 metres deep, incredibly fertile. Can be quite difficult to manage. Because they're so fertile, they grow a lot of foliage growth. So need a lot of trimming and a lot of manipulation in the vineyard. But yeah, some really, really beautiful wines are made there. The really interesting thing about this, South Gippsland is what the impact the ocean has. There's a there's a very heavy maritime influence on these vineyards on the left-hand side, and the maritime influence still extends into the vineyards in Leongatha, so we get this cooling winds that come through generally from the west or the southwest, and keep the overnight temperatures quite moderate. And actually, so you'll find that, if it's in the Yarra Valley and it's, for an example, it might be 35 degrees up in the Yarra. If we get this cooling sea breeze that comes through in the afternoon, it doesn't affect the Yarra Valley, but here it might drop the temperatures to 28 or even 25. So we might be 10 degrees cooler than the Yarra Valley, sort of late in the evening. So really makes a big difference to the fact that we end up ripening a couple of weeks later than the Yarra Valley, and has that really lovely kind of moderating effect. And when we came to blending in 2022, we have a wine called All the Dirts, which is essentially, as you would expect, it's all of the vineyards mixed together. So it's like our assemblage wine, or our, the wine that's basically all of our vineyards in the one wine together. And we essentially that's our most important wine really at the end of the day. That's because that wine is a $55 Pinot now, and really it needs to speak of Dirty 3 and South Gippsland. So it's a blend of all of our vineyards. It's not a representation of one place, but it's a representation of a place. So as in, when I say a place, I mean South Gippsland and its blend, and it still should always feel like it's from here. In 2022, as I say, our most important wine is the All the Dirts Pinot Noir. So we'd made all the dirts, we'd sort of looked at the blend of all the dirts and gone, yeah, okay, there's that. And we go, okay, what have we got left to do our single vineyards with? And 2022 was a really, really small vintage. The weather was horrendous in the spring and the flowering was really poor, so our yields were really, really low. And I was like looking through the blends and going, oh, we've got to do dirt 1 and dirt 2, dirt 3. So we pulled some wines out and went, okay, that's the best dirt 1 we can make, that's the best 2 we can make, that's the best dirt 3 we can make. And then we went, oh God, all the dirts looks terrible. We've kind of extracted everything out of that. So we needed to go, right, we've got to reset all this and go, right, let's just build all the dirts back up again. Okay, there's not enough here to do that concept this year. Let's leave it alone. There was one particular wine which really stood out, and it was a 100% whole bunch ferment wine that was just quite extraordinary. And that came out of like a trial that we did the year before, where I'd never really been a massive fan of 100% whole bunch Pinot Noir. I always thought that it had to be very careful with it, that it often sort of it overtook the sort of natural fruit and certainly the terroir of the region, and became more about winemaking. And so 2021 we had this one particular vineyard which is called Lauriston, which is over near Coronella on Western Port Bay, and we made this 100% whole bunch ferment wine from that particular year, and the wine was really fantastic. And 2022 came along and we went, right, we've got a really small amount of grapes from this vineyard. What are we going to do with them? We go, right, let's just put it all on red. Let's just put them all in the one ferment, which was a really big risk, because if it didn't come off, we kind of knew that we liked what we saw the year before, but it was like, we're going all in on this one. And I was so glad we did, because like we made this wine that was just like no other wine I've ever made. It was really concentrated, really deep, you know, heaps of fruit. It had really obvious whole bunch ferment character, but it held it all together because of the power of the fruit. And it was just this particularly special wine, but it was really out of style with wines that we'd ever made before. So it was like, what are we going to do with this thing? Like, you know, we can blend it back into all the dirts, but it's probably nice to have a little parcel to do. So that was when Magic Dirt was born. So there's a famous band in Australia called Magic Dirt, because our winery is named after Dirty Three, which is the band. They're an underground Melbourne band called Dirty Three, instrumental band. And so that's where our Dirty Three name came from. And then we thought, oh, it's only fitting that we could have to do a Magic Dirt at some stage, and that was when Magic Dirt was born. So as I say, it's a really special wine. It's still drinking really, really beautifully. Quite out of style with, as I say, with what we would normally do, but it's a delicious drink and really wonderful. So this is our 2024 Magic Dirt Pinot Noir. It's like a reserve style wine, for want of a better word. It's like our top wine now, and becomes, I guess, the most unique wine of the vintage. And this one from 2024, being Pinot Noir grapes from the Tilson vineyard in Leongatha, was definitely that. Unquestionably the most natural wine that I've ever made in my life. It was, the grapes just looked wonderful when they came off the vine. We were able to pick them at the perfect time. 2024 was very much about a vineyard of two halves. There was a little bit of a heat spike around about the long weekend in March, and this was picked just before that, and the wines that were picked after have a very different feel to the wines that were picked before the heat spike. So we're really lucky that this came off then, and really literally this wine is a wine that we just got put into a fermenter, 0 additions, fermented, pressed off, put to barrel, racked out of barrel and put into bottle. And it's just a really, as I say, just a really beautiful wine that has, I think, classic South Gippsland characters. There's a really lovely earthy flavour to it, really lovely savoury backbone that has this sort of like moorish and quite mouth salivating kind of acidity to it. And I think that's a really kind of important part of not just South Gippsland Pinot, but certainly this vineyard.